Good evening and welcome to our Bible class tonight. Thank you for your presence here on this Wednesday evening. And it seems like it's been several years since I've been here on Wednesday night. As a matter of fact, when I was last here, I think it was already dark outside. Now it's still daylight. But sometimes speaking appointments for preachers come in large sections or blocks of time on the calendar. Some of you might remember a time when gospel meetings were primarily conducted in the summer months. When I had your summer meeting, been on the ground. And I'm not as old as some of you, but I can at least remember maybe not 2 or 3 week meetings, but I can remember meetings starting on Sunday and ending on Sunday. And so we don't have that anymore. But now summers are so busy for most families, it seems that springtime or the fall has turned into a better time to have a gospel meeting. That's usually a Sunday through Wednesday meeting. But still, it's worthwhile, it's enjoyable, I appreciate the privilege, and I'm honored that some would ask me to come and speak in these meetings. I want to mention to you briefly, and this will be something that I know long-time members here will appreciate, particularly being able to visit with Albert and Zelma McDaniel was a true pleasure during the last few weeks. The McDaniels were among the oldest students ever to go through the school, and she went through the school too. She took every class she did. Of course, she didn't stand and preach or anything like that, but she did take all of the courses, and she took the examinations right along with the men. She's not done better than all the men in the class as far as that goes. But they are on up in years, and Brother McDaniel was in rehab when I visited with him. But overall, they're doing well despite their age and despite ailments. It was also good to be with graduates of our school. That's a blessing. I was with Brother Caleb Hall, who's a recent graduate and preaches where I used to preach, down in Fayette, Alabama, and he's doing an excellent work there. Brother Kim Glassall, very recent graduate, is preaching for the Sunnyview congregation in Farmington, and they have long been contributors and supporters of the work of the Memphis School of Preaching. I didn't realize until I was there just how many of our graduates have worked with that congregation. Quite a number. And then this past week, I was in Texas. A week ago, I guess, I was in Texas with Wayne Jones at Focal Point, a program that's likened to polishing the pulpit, which is more familiar, I guess, to some. And I saw numerous graduates of the Memphis School of Preaching working in that particular region of Texas. And that was a blessing. And then I've been to East Hill in Pulaski here in the last week for the lectureship there. Alicia and I both spoke. And Brother Jonathan Burns is now the preacher following Brother Paul Sane, who was a preacher there for a long time. So that's all been a blessing. And why I tell you that is because I think you're interested in it. Number one, I think you're interested in it because you play a vital role in the Memphis School of Preaching. Your encouragement of that work, your prayers for that work, support of it, it's here on our grounds, it's part of our work, and I know you take great pride in it as well, you should. And so we're thankful for those who come our way and have confidence in us to receive their training, and we're just tickled to death when these students go out and serve admirably in these various congregations. I owe Brother Mosier a particular debt of gratitude. I don't know if I want to say debt of gratitude. I don't want to be indebted to Brother Mosier, but I'm indebted to Brother Mosier. He always will be. But I appreciate his taking this class the last few weeks, and he's not been feeling well. He's home Sunday. I talked to him today, and I checked on how he was doing. He said he was feeling better. To what extent, I don't really know. But we're mindful of Brother Mosier. Brother Clark, we're glad to see you here tonight. Brother Clark's been home and not feeling well the last several weeks. We're glad Brother TJ will be back with us this evening. Buster Rogers went home from the hospital and is overall doing well. The bulletin, you'll want to check the bulletin because mention is made of others who are sick, and we want to be mindful of them and pray for them and encourage them. I also want you to make sure you get a bulletin because this is the bulletin that salutes our high school graduates. I think it's the first time ever I've had to use the entire bulletin for those graduating high school. In fact, I usually will include in that one bulletin those who graduated high school and college. But I only could include the high school graduates this week. We have 3 more that are graduating from college, 2 receiving their undergraduate degrees, and then Sarah Phillips is has received her doctoral degree in pharmacy. And maybe there's 4. I can't remember if it's 3 or 4. I don't know the 4th one. But, Lewis and Adam.
And Jackson.
Oh, Jackson is. Yes, Jackson is. Well, my apologies to Jackson. Jackson, you'll be page 1 next week's bulletin, I guarantee you. Well, Jackson did graduate. Jackson and Adam graduated from Memphis. And so, well, who knows? I may have to extend this out there for a week. Some may come up tonight and say, I'm graduating here soon. So, yes, we'll have that. Sure will. The tables are already set up, and my son's putting this together tonight. So, anyway, that's good. Lewis, we want to congratulate you too. I think, despite my momentary lapse here a minute ago, I've said something about Jackson already, but I haven't said anything about you to your face with you here in the audience, but we're proud of you. And so Jackson, Adam, Sarah, and Lewis, we're proud of all of you. All right? So before I get in more trouble by leaving out my name, that's why you don't start down there. Then I better get into tonight's lesson. We are studying not 2 Samuel, but 1 Kings. Here's what I want us to do between now and the time we start our summer series, which will be in July. And we're going to have a summer series similar to what we had last year. We're going to have different speakers coming every night. And this summer series this year, like last year, really is dealing with matters that are fundamental. Last year we talked about worship. This year we're talking about the plan of salvation. Our elders want to always keep in front of our congregation those fundamentals. And I believe that as a preacher. And so what we're going to do is just study the simple plan of salvation. Most of us in this room here tonight have obeyed the simple gospel invitation initially, having our sins forgiven through the watery grave of baptism by the blood of Jesus. And now we're seeking to live faithful unto our Lord until He comes again, until the time of our passing. We also can use this as an evangelistic tool, can't we? Be a good time to invite others to come and hear these messages. But that will begin in July. Up until that point, I want to highlight some of the kings of Israel and Judah and really just give you a vignette, just an overview of some of the administrations of these different kings. Some of them were good kings, the majority of them were evil kings. But tonight we're still looking at that renowned king Solomon, the most glorious of all the kings, right? This particular time in which Solomon reigned, this was the prosperous, glorious period in Israel. It was brief, wasn't it? It was brief, but it was a beautiful, beautiful time. If I had to pick a time that I would want to have been living here in the Old Testament period, it would probably have been during the reign of Solomon. Solomon, of course, as the book of 1 Kings opens, is a man who has a heart that's very open and receptive to God. Now, it has been said before that Solomon was a man who had all the wisdom in the world that a man could have. and God blessed him. More than any other man, he had that wisdom. And yet we don't always see Solomon walking the way he should. His will was not always in harmony with his wisdom, right? Can it be true today that sometimes we know what is the right thing to do, but we still don't do it? Sure. We're not utilizing that wisdom that we have, right? I mean, if you have the Word of God in your possession, you study it, you have a good knowledge of it, and you know what is approved by God and what's not, and whatever is approved of God, you do that. That's wise, isn't it? It's wise. And you do that which is disapproved by God, that's unwise. That's not going to be in your best interest. And yet sometimes all of us know we have flagrantly violated the will of God even though we knew better. Maybe because of the appeal to fleshly desires and lust, we give in to temptation, and there are consequences to pay because of that. Now Solomon is an impressive figure. Solomon, of course, has an interesting background. He is the son of whom? David and Bathsheba. All right? David and Bathsheba. He was not the son that was conceived by Bathsheba when David committed adultery with her. That son died. But Solomon was born later. And it was Solomon who God chose to be king. Remember, God chose the kings of Israel. And this is still during the time of the United Kingdom. 3 kings of the United Kingdom. Saul and David and then Solomon. And each one reigned for how many years? 40 years. So Solomon is now the last king before there's going to be a great division. But that's still in the future. At this particular point, when we study the life of Solomon, he becomes king, and in those early days, all looked so good. Solomon is trusting in God. He is granted his prayer request. And the prayer request was this, that he might judge wisely. Now that prayer was honored by God. He did not pray for wealth, did he? He did not pray for might. He didn't pray for wealth because at that time he understood that God supplied every need. Therefore, he didn't need to pray for wealth. He didn't pray for might because he knew God would take care of him and take care of Israel. But he did pray for wisdom. And that prayer was honored by God. He was a man who was filled with wisdom. And he was filled with earthly, worldly wisdom as well as spiritual wisdom. By earthly wisdom, I mean that Solomon was a man of great knowledge. He was a man of great intellect. He was so talented. He was a man who could write any number of hymns and poetry. He was a man who knew all about vegetation. He was a man who knew about the animal kingdom. He was likened to a scientist in many ways. He was a man who was filled with judicial wisdom. He knew how to make decisions and choices that were good and that were favorable and that God could approve. And we have an example of that in 1 Kings chapter 3, when that woman came to him, or rather 2 women came to him, and one woman says, "This is my baby," and another says, "This is my baby." And we know the story there. And when Solomon says, "Here's how we're going to decide. Bring me a sword." Now, one is really his mother. The other child has died. And she's stolen this other baby. And so it is a drama that unfolds there in 1 Kings 3. And in that drama, we find Solomon saying, "Bring me a sword. We're just going to slice this baby in 2. You'll get one half over here, and you'll get the other half." And then, of course, the natural tendency of the mother, "No, she can have the baby. Don't you take that sword to my baby." And therefore he knew through his wisdom, through his intelligence, that, this is the mother, because the natural tendency of a mother is to do what? Protect her child at all costs. Many of you in this room, you are mothers. You had, at one time in your life, small children. And so, you know as well as I do, if someone said to you, either that baby dies or you give me the baby, what are you going to do? You're going to give the baby to somebody, right? So you've got to do whatever you can to protect the life and hope you get the baby back. And so you do whatever you can to protect that baby. And that's why we sometimes talk about those who will abandon their babies or abort their babies or whatever it may be, abuse their babies. That's not natural, is it? A mother or father should never seek harm to their child. In fact, a person with any degree of moral character, any person at all that has any conscience would never want to harm any child, right? Never. And yet they do. And so we see when somebody does that, that's unnatural, that's abnormal. And that person must be locked away. Well, Solomon makes a correct judicial decision here in chapter 3. And verse 28 says, all Israel heard of the judgment which the king had judged, and they feared the king, for they saw that the wisdom of God was in him to do judgment. So Solomon is a well-respected king. Here's what's absolutely necessary to be a great, great leader among men. You've got to gain their respect, right? You've got to gain their respect. Because of Solomon's reliance upon God, and this is God's nation. These are His chosen people. And Solomon is the king. And so it's only right that since these people are identified as the people of God, that the king ought to be seeking after God. That's what is so strange, so bizarre as you read about this long list of kings. They are kings of God's people, and yet so many of them turned their backs on God just like the people did. Now, Solomon is a man who is demanding, commanding respect through these judicial decisions that he makes. The people know that he's a man of God. The people know he's seeking after God. They know he is a wise man. And so verse 28 goes right into chapter 4, verse 1. He was the king over all Israel. He's the king over all Israel. This is a time of great unity as well as a time of great prosperity. You see what I'm saying? There were times when you read about Saul, and during the time of his kingship, you'd say, I sure wouldn't have wanted to have been part of that community when Saul was the king. Same is true for David. Remember all the violence that took place during the reign of David? David considered a man of war. In fact, he couldn't even build God's house, could he? But we're going to see here that now that Solomon is the king and peace is abounding, hey, it's time to build God a house, right? And not only is God's house going to be built, Solomon's going to build him a beautiful palace right along with it. You know, when things are prospering, it's a whole lot easier for the king or a president or a dictator, whoever it might be, to also do things that favor himself, right? These people have a lot going for them, and they owe it to God, but they give Solomon, their king, the credit because he is a man of God. I'll show you something else about Solomon that's important. A good leader not only commands respect, he's a delegator. Look at verse 7. And Solomon had 12 officers over all Israel, which provided victuals for the king and his household. Each man his month in a year made provision. Now, I want you to notice that Solomon was not one like Moses, who took all of the decisions and all of the care and all of the work that goes into leading upon himself. A good leader knows how to do what? To delegate that, right? To delegate. Something was mentioned by Brother Larry Acuff this last Saturday during our restoration, our lectureship, Truth and Love lectureship in Pulaski. And I got it started by previously in the hour before Brother Larry spoke by talking about an incident that involved the following brethren: Brother Willard Collins, Brother Ira North, and Brother Baxelberry Baxter. And Brother Acuff, who's a good friend and also a mentor of mine, he stood to speak and he said, you know, Brother Barry brought back some wonderful memories when he brought up those three men, because he said, I studied many years ago at David Lipscomb College. And he said, Brother Collins was a great help to me. And he said, I had great respect for Batsell Barrett Baxter. Said he was a good man, kind man. He said, but you know, we had him for debate and things of that nature. I could also fear him. He said, and Brother North, our North, was a man who had a vision. And he said he was like a mentor to me. Well, many of you remember the vision of Brother North. He wanted to build a large congregation of the Lord's people, and he did, with the help of many others. But I've always understood this about Brother North. He was an excellent delegator. Somebody could come to Brother North and say, here's what we need to do, and Brother North say something like this, and you're the one to do it. All right, you're the one to do it. Brother Lawrence Kirby passed away about a year ago, and we miss Brother Kirby, and we miss all these other elders we've known and loved through the years. Brother Bobbitt, Brother Hayes, Brother Embry. I served under all of those men. But Brother Kirby, I remember when he would conduct the meeting of the elders and deacons, something might be suggested, and Andy, you can probably hear him. He'd say, well, good, you take care of that, right? And that's delegating, isn't it? That's a good idea. All the elders like that. And so you go ahead and take care of that. Sounds good to us, all right? And I've heard that about Bill Hatcher. You know, I only knew Sue, but I've heard about Bill, that Bill would say, I'll get it done. I'll get something done. And he might not do it, but he'd have somebody to do it, all right? So there's an art to that, it seems. Not everybody has it, but it appears to me that Solomon was one who was a great delegator. Now remember, Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, says, you're going to wear yourself out. He said, out there in the wilderness, and all these people would bring their complaints and their various cases against another before Moses, and Moses would hear these people all day long. And this is perhaps one of the most complaining people you'd ever know, right? The children of Israel out there in the wilderness. And Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, says, you've got to be careful. It's a good father-in-law, isn't it? He says, you need to be careful. You're taking too much on yourself. He said, you get some others under you that can handle some of these other situations, these other cases, these other complaints and things of that nature. You see something similar to our own court system that way, right? Not every case that comes up in a court goes to the Supreme Court, right? So Moses is the leader of the people. There's some things he'll want to hear because of the magnitude of it, but he needs some help when it comes to these other problems that arise. So I see here that Solomon was a great delegator. I see something else here about Solomon and his reign, and that is that dominion that was far greater than any of the other kings, either in the United Kingdom or the divided kingdom. Obviously, during the divided kingdom, the kingdom is not going to be as great as it is at the time of Solomon, but far beyond David, far beyond Saul, is the dominion of King Solomon. Look at verse 21 of chapter 4. Solomon reigned over all the kingdoms from the river unto the land of the Philistines and unto the border of Egypt. They brought presents and served Solomon all the days of his life. Now, how many times do we say that when it comes to God's people, they're usually always going to be a small minority, right? At any time in history. The people that really are serving God, they'll be small in number. And we oftentimes preach and teach, and correctly so, don't be fooled by numbers. One man who would oftentimes fill stadiums and arenas with people to come hear his message. He would teach some things true, but he would teach some things that were false. He wouldn't teach people what to do to be saved, not what the Bible taught. And yet he was packing these auditoriums with people. And when a gospel preacher went to him and said, you're not teaching truth on the matter of salvation. And the man said, well, look who has the crowds, right? Well, that has nothing to do with whether or not one is teaching truth or error. That has nothing to do with whether or not a man is right or wrong based on his crowd. It's not determined that way. And so, just because the majority of people think something is right doesn't necessarily mean that it's right, does it? Now what I'm saying is this, God's people have always been really a small minority. Even the first century church, we're impressed by what happened on the day of Pentecost. Some 3,000 people gathered together, obeyed the gospel, but you don't ever hear that happening again, do you? As you continue, Paul over in Acts 17 would preach to the masses of people in Athens, And most of the people there mocked him, scoffed at what he was saying, denying the resurrection. There were other people who said, well, here you again on this matter. But then there were a few who believed him, and that means they obeyed the gospel, and he names them. All right? Just a few. So what's interesting to me about Solomon, this is one point in history where the people of God were a dominant people. That's rare. I mean, the reign of Solomon is extensive. And he has a dominion that stretches far and wide. And there are people who are subservient to him from other nations. And they respect him and they honor him. And so during this time, his dominion is expansive. But not only that, there was peace during this time. Look at verse 25. Judah and Israel dwelt safely, every man under his vine and under his fig tree, from Dan even to Beersheba, all the days of Solomon. You might say this, every man is just sitting under a palm tree enjoying life, right? I mean, it's just, everything is one. Got a hammock out there. It's just an expression, from Dan to Beersheba, from top to bottom, all across the country, everybody is able to enjoy a period of peace and prosperity, all right? Now, have you ever known anyone running for public office that didn't want to bring what? He said prosperity, right? That gets our attention. We want to be prosperous people, and we want to live in peace. It's that kind of time. It's brief. It's not going to last long. But it's that time in Israel when Solomon is on the throne. And so the people are at peace. They also have great military might. Don't forget that. A key to peace in physical kingdoms is military might, isn't it? Well, I know God's their protector, but they were also militarily strong. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen, and those officers provided victuals for King Solomon and for all that came into King Solomon's table, every man in his month. Look at this. They lacked nothing. So they were prosperous people. They're strong militarily. There is peace. It's a prosperous time, and not only that, the people of Israel can say, you know what? We have the wisest king on earth. The wisest. Now, it's wonderful that Israel, for this brief moment, can take great pride in their leader. Because, you see, they would not always be able to have this kind of pride in Solomon, would they? But they do for the moment. He is a man known for his wisdom, for in verse 29 of chapter 4, God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding exceeding much. And look at this, and largeness of heart, even as the sand that is on the seashore. That's just, of course, an expression to show the enormity of it. Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country. You ever heard of those from the east would come with their wisdom? Wise men from the east came when Jesus was born. Wisdom would come from the east, but he excelled all the wisdom of the children of the east country. You ever study Oriental history? You know it goes back a long way. And the teachings from the ancient Orient have been around a long time. But Solomon's wisdom excelled the wisdom of all the children of the east country and all the wisdom down in Egypt. And he was wiser than all men. And so when we make this statement, the wisest man who ever lived was Solomon, it's true. We might even teach our children, when speaking of Solomon, maybe it's on one of those flashcards, who was the wisest man who ever lived? It was Solomon. And that was a result, number one, because he was the son of David. And he learned from his righteous father to revere, to respect God. All right? He prayed a proper prayer, didn't he? And he kept his heart close to God. And God answered his prayer for wisdom. Look at verse 32. He spake 3,000 proverbs, and his songs were 1,005. So you got here a man who's a poet. You have a man who is a hymn writer. We have 31 chapters in the book of Proverbs. That's just a small amount of the Proverbs that he wrote. Most of the book of Proverbs written by Solomon. And so He spake of trees, from the cedar tree that's in Lebanon, even unto the hyssop that springeth out of the wall. He's a botanist. I mean, he knows all about flowers. He knows all about flowers. In fact, if you asked him about a problem in mathematics, he could answer it. If you asked him about a problem in geology, he'd know the answer. Geography, he knew it. Botany, astronomy, all of them. All of the natural sciences, he would have been so wise. He was a man who could speak great languages. He was a great writer. He obviously knew about music. I mean, this is a tremendous, tremendous man. If someone of his caliber was living today, then we would certainly know who he is. And so we oftentimes are impressed by the Bill Gates of our world because of the intellect, the knowledge of computers and other forms of technology that have made him billions of dollars. I read something today, and I'll throw it out here, I can't fathom it, and I still can't, I don't know how it happened, but who knows. It said Bill Gates could become the first trillionaire. You ever think we'd hear something like that? Trillionaire? I don't know, maybe he's worth now about 100 billion, I don't know, but you know that thing starts escalating, and you know, he gives a lot of it away, but we're impressed with people today who are smart and people who have money. What I'm saying is, Solomon at this particular time in his life was a man of wisdom. He was a man who was intelligent. He was a man of great, immense wealth and popularity, and a man of God. All right? I mean, he's got it going right now. And so Solomon is a popular king. Look at verse 34. And there came all people to hear the wisdom of Solomon, from all kings of the earth, which had heard of his wisdom. Where are you going? We're going to visit Solomon. All right? Kings would leave their domains. Kings, queens, people would bow down to these kings and these queens of earthly kingdoms. And what would they do? They'd come to Solomon and bow down before him. If ever there was one that was likened to the king of the earth, it's Solomon. Now, that's the reason that we can also say Solomon was a type of Christ, wasn't he? Solomon was a type of Christ. And Jesus would make reference to Solomon. You remember that? He said to one group of people, he said that the Queen of Sheba came from that faraway country to hear the words of Solomon. But a greater than Solomon is here, right? When Jesus was here, a greater than Solomon is here. And they were rejecting him, weren't they? But Solomon during this time was very, very popular. Now, Solomon was good at diplomacy. And this he owed a lot to his father. He didn't go out of his way to upset the friends of his father. Okay? One of those kings that loved his father was a king named Hiram of Tyre. And chapter 5 says, Hiram, the king of Tyre, sent his servants unto Solomon, for he had heard that they had anointed him king in the room of his father. Notice this, for Hiram was ever a lover of David. Hiram loved King David. And no doubt he wants to see if he can love King Solomon. And King Solomon, out of great respect for Hiram, sends him notice through these servants. Verse 3. You know that David my father couldn't build a house in the name of the Lord his God, for the wars which were about him on every side. Unto the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God hath given me rest on every side, so that there is neither adversary nor evil occurrent. And behold, I purpose to build a house unto the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord spake unto David my father, saying, Thy son, whom I will set upon thy throne in thy room, he shall build a house unto my name. He sends this message back to Hiram, and he says, King Hiram, will you help me? You who love my father so much, will you help me build this house? Good diplomacy, right? Because in so doing, I'm going to assist you, and you can assist me. What makes for good relationships among foreign powers? You help me, I help you, right? You help me, I help you. We're going to even find that King Solomon was good in his trade dealings. we're going to find Israel was always involved in exporting and importing, okay? He would be receiving from other countries, particular Hiram, and then at the same time, the ships would be leaving, sailing to some far-off distance. These would be the exports, all right? So trade discussions have been around for a long time. And so Solomon was involved in that as well. He prospered, that is, Hiram prospered because of the diplomacy, Solomon prospered because of the diplomacy of David. Hiram was a lover of David. David loved Hiram, and because of their relationship, we find that King Solomon was able to build that house. Now, I want to close with one more statement, and that is, I find also that he was a man who was judicious and fair. Look at verse 13. King Solomon raised a levy out of all Israel, and the levy was 30,000 men. And if you continue to read that particular passage, you will see that King Solomon employed a whole lot of men to work for him, and he would pay them. And so he employed these people while they were engaged in this good work. So the people are prospering, and King Solomon is much loved and respected. And we're going to notice in the next few chapters, as we continue our study, in this overview of 1 Kings, we're going to notice that King Solomon would indeed get to build the temple of God. Remember, the tabernacle is going to be based upon that pattern, but it's time for a more permanent house of God. David couldn't do it, but King Solomon did.